Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of FU Stigma, Counseling Chats with Dr. Lott. Today we're going to talk about how the media sucks when it comes to stigma. Stay tuned. That's right, the media sucks. And I say this because when it comes to mental illness, they continually perpetuate the stigma and stereotypes associated with mental illness. And then the mental health community get a bad name. I want to talk a little bit about why stigma is harmful. So, stigma creates a negative perspective. So, if you don't know anything about somebody's condition, whether it is bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, you go off what you might have heard. Some people take the time to research, and congratulations to you if you do that. But if you don't, you might just go off what people are saying. And if you look at the media, it's always portrayed in a negative light. It causes unnecessary separation for this group, so it's always a us versus them phenomenon. People don't want to be associated with other people who have a mental illness because they don't understand it, and people don't want to get involved with things that they don't understand, so they shy away from it. It's very isolating, it's very marginalizing for this community, and so people in the mental health community tend to stay to themselves and don't really want to build relationships with mental health providers or people outside of their experiences. So it creates their own community, and it's just not helpful mentally and emotionally. There's also the idea that stigma is harmful because it perpetuates the underlying issues related to mental health. Stigma is also harmful because it misinterprets facts that is related to what it means to have a mental illness. So, society or movies or the news might say that schizophrenia, bipolar, anxiety, depression, PTSD looks like this, and they show you the most extreme, severe cases, right? As opposed to what the everyday experience might be. So people have it in their minds that this is what it looks like all the time, and it's really not the case. Stigma also exacerbates myths related to mental illness. So as I mentioned before, the things that we hear about mental illness are usually negative, and so then we generalize the whole entire group, and we don't see people as individuals anymore. We don't see people for people. We see them as a mental illness, and this is what stigma does. This stigma also creates feelings of unsafety and mistrust, and creates feelings of feeling flawed or feeling like there's something wrong with you, you don't belong, which is another reason why people with mental illness hide it or tend to stick with their own people, so to say. It restricts support from family and community, because if people don't understand what the illness is in the first place, then they can't be a proper support to the community. So those are some reasons why stigma is harmful. But I want to get back to why social media sucks. And basically it's because they perpetuate the stigma, the negative stereotypes, the prejudice, the discrimination. And they refuse to use the new information that they get to inform how they give information. So let's say that they learn that, hey, no, that wasn't a person with mental illness who did a mass bombing. That was somebody who was just pissed off. They didn't have a mental illness. Well, they don't come back and correct that. So people who are not knowing about this community tend to just hold on to what they believed in the first place, or the misinformation that they got, and then they spread it. I think social media also needs a scapegoat. They need a reason to say this is why these things happen. So they want to blame the mental health community for the terrible things that happen in the world, and it's just not always the case. I mentioned stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. Stereotypes, when we generalize a whole group of people based on maybe one or two people that you know, it doesn't give anybody a chance to be an individual. They just automatically get grouped into this category, and this discrimination is the behavior that people have against people with mental illness. So for instance, if a landlord said, I'm not renting to people who have a mental illness, or I'm not renting to people that's from this certain group, it really creates other barriers, societal barriers, and macro barriers for that individual because of the poor assumptions that they make about the group, and that's all related to stigma. You might be asking, well, we know this, and this is a known problem, and that's true, it is a known problem, but what's being done about it? You can look on the Google or any internet source and see that there are tons of organizations that are working to destigmatize mental health. Some of them are the NBCC. We have NAMIs of the world. We have Thresholds. There's a lot of community mental health agencies that's working to help destigmatize mental health. There's universities and curriculum that is aimed at trying to destigmatize mental health. But not enough is being done because it's still a massive problem. So I think that it's really important to get this information in front of people early, especially if you're in the mental health field. You hear about stigma, but do you take a course on it? We need a course on it, and that's something that I'm passionate about and something that I'm working on because I think that it should be a required thing that we do. You can also go to workshops and do self-education to get a better understanding of stigma and its impact on people. What can you do right now? Let's say you didn't have the resources or the time or the wherewithal to do the research needed to understand stigma. Educate yourself. There's on the internet, like there's quick Google searches that you can go to about stigma and ways that you can help destigmatize. So part of that is being in contact with the community. That means being embraced or being engulfed in the community of people with mental illness. Maybe you want to work as a volunteer at a community mental health agency or at a hospital where they have behavioral health services. Understand the community by being a part of it and embracing it and understanding the different dynamics. That is one of the best ways that you could help destigmatize is by learning about it yourself. And then you definitely want to speak up when you hear stereotypes, when you hear myths, when you hear negative attitudes about mental illness. Speak up and say something. Nope, that's not actually right. You know, people with mental illness are not all dangerous, or they're not crazy, or using words like that. Language has a lot to do with stigma as well. So you can do your part in your everyday conversations. If you hear something, say something. Stigma is associated with mental illness, and there are certain groups that tend to be stigmatized, and I kind of touched on that. So people with mental illness, they're stigmatized. There are many groups that are victims of stigmatization. So I mentioned mental health groups, but minorities are also groups that are stigmatized negatively. Oppressed groups such as people of color or people who have low SES, people with disabilities, and then people who deviate from the norm. So anybody that's not part of the mainstream or the majority. People who are not part of the mainstream or majority are often ostracized or marginalized. So these are just some of the groups that might experience stigma other than mental health groups. So it's everywhere. It's individual, it's at the individual level, it's at the macro level, it's in our laws, it's in a lot of the policies and procedures and the way that we do things. The housing, the bank systems, it's everywhere if you just open your eyes to see. So I'm hoping you can be someone who pays more attention to this, even if it's just starting with yourself, and then educating the people around you. And that is how we start to destigmatize mental health and destigmatize attitudes around others who might experience stigma. I hope this was helpful. I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks.